Thank you very much. How are you guys doing today? You need to stretch out a little bit? We'll stretch? All right. Let's stretch a little bit more. So my name is Jonathan Nelson, and I'll just kind of dive in while we are having a chat and getting the presentation up. I am a strange child. Hackers and Founders is a strange organization. First of all, hacker in Silicon Valley parlance means clever problem solver, as in nice hack dude. Dude being gender neutral in this case. We are not people who steal other people's data. We would be the white hat hacker varieties. And I moved to Silicon Valley about a decade ago. My dream was, if the success rate of startups is 1 to 10, obviously you have to build 10 startups, right? And so I moved to Silicon Valley with this crazy idea that I would build 10 startups over a decade, and I would eventually figure out what it was that I was actually doing. And so I started having a series of events called Hackers and Founders. Our very first event was a handful of dudes and me in a bar, dude being gender neutral. The next month it was 8 people, next month it was 13. Fairly within 2009, 2010, we saw an explosion of people. There were hundreds of people at a bar hanging out at our events. And we started seeing this global explosion of tech entrepreneurship. And I started wandering around saying, hey, does anybody see what's going on here? This is amazing. Like, there are literally thousands and thousands of tech entrepreneurs popping up all over the globe. You no longer have to be in a Silicon Valley garage to actually do that. Hackers and Founders events have actually been held in 125 cities around the globe. We have had over 300,000 tech entrepreneurs attend our events. We have been at the very beginning, the cutting edge of this global explosion in technology startups. I'll go back to a slide that I actually missed here. I told you I was a strange kid. This is where I grew up. We were at the end of 6 hours of dirt road in rural Honduras. That is an adobe house. That'll become pertinent later on. Moved to Silicon Valley, started this event. Being a community, we actually started helping companies land in Silicon Valley and then helping them scale globally. We started Silicon Valley's first Founders Cooperative. Startups pay stock into a shared equity pool. They become part owners of the pool. We keep about a third of the pool, and then we've sold roughly half of each pool to pay our bills. We have done 4 of these funds. We worked with 55 companies. Those companies have gone from 0 to about $600 million in valuation. They've raised $100 million as a group. We've had 7 exits, or 7 of our companies have actually been acquired in only 5 years, and we are just getting going. In seeing a lot of these entrepreneurs at a bar, you actually, if you're having a pint with your mates, you end up talking about what sucks about your company. What are my biggest problems? What are my biggest headaches? And repeatedly, what I kept on hearing over and over and over again was access to capital, access to capital. People would come from all the way around the world to Silicon Valley. They'd end up at one of our events, and they'd be like, Jonathan, hey, how do I raise $5 million here in Silicon Valley? And I'd be like, I don't know. They're like, no, you run Hackers and Founders, this is amazing. And so I started trying to learn how the whole financing ecosystem started to work. When the Jobs Act and crowdfunding actually came along, I advised a law school in Silicon Valley on their startup program. And through them, in partnership with them, we submitted 80 pages of comments to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Death Star, if you are a geek doing a token sale. And we submitted 80 pages of comments to these people and saying, hey, this is what needs to happen to provide access to capital to the thousands, the tens of thousands of small 2- and 3-person startups who are actually forming in the United States and around the globe. Apparently, not a whole lot of people can speak intelligently about thousands of 2- and 3-person companies. So Commissioner Stein, she asked me to join an SEC committee on capital formation. So I have been in DC every 3 months for the last couple of years. I am the only dude in the building with a ponytail. But it has been very, very interesting being on this committee as they're actually starting to talk about the problems with primarily the Jobs Act. And one of the biggest challenges that we have actually had is this concentration of capital formation. This is centralized capital formation. In Silicon Valley this year, there's going to be $30 billion invested into technology companies. In the rest of the world, it's probably going to be about $10 billion. China is kind of a different beast. But 2/3 of all the venture capital in the world is actually invested within 100 kilometers of my house. It's kind of absurd. And what has happened with that immense inpouring of capital is that you have actually had, over the last 70 years, you have had technology companies that have grown from 2 and 3 people in a garage or in a bar to the market capitalization of all the technology companies in Silicon Valley is about $4 trillion. That is 15% of all of the securities or equities or all the stock in the United States is headquartered within 100 kilometers of my house, and it's 5% of all of the securities or all of the stock in the world. You have this immense concentration of wealth that has actually happened. It leads to all sorts of inequalities. California is seen as a progressive area. However, we actually see some of the most gross income inequalities in the world, is my guess, just because people are so insanely wealthy. We have housing shortages, and so there's a lot of homeless people. And as we've been thinking about this problem of the concentration of wealth, the concentration of capital, talking with thousands of entrepreneurs about the problems in accessing capital, William Gibson said this comment which was very prescient to me. He said, the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. We see that all the time in Silicon Valley. There's kind of things happen and they slowly diffuse throughout the world. When it actually comes to capital, I would say Jonathan Nelson's corollary to William Gibson's statement is that capital is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed, which is why you have this kind of migration, this hodge that people actually take to Silicon Valley to fundraise to build their technology companies. And it's actually problematic when these are your friends holding entrepreneurship events around the globe. And that has just really baked my noodle. I have obsessed about how do we actually get capital to these companies. And one of the biggest challenges is the problem of liquidity. When you invest into a technology company, what you do is you buy their stock. And if it is a private company, you don't really know if you've made a good decision or not until you can sell that again on a stock exchange or to another company. The Google buys you. 85% of all of the world's technology mergers and acquisitions happen in Silicon Valley. You have $4 trillion worth of companies acquiring a bunch of startups for the technology, for the engineers, for the employees. And so you have this very big concentration of liquidity that actually happens in Silicon Valley, but it's still frozen. I have any number of friends who are paper millionaires. They have stock options worth, $5 million, but is Google going to buy their company? Is Cisco going to buy their company? And this is what's known as the liquidity problem. In the Jobs Act, in the crowdfunding space, we've been talking about anyone can actually invest into a technology company in the United States if they meet certain regulations, if they actually go through appropriate processes. But the problem that we talked about in the SEC committee is that how do these non-accredited investors get their money back out? If you are in Des Moines, Iowa, and you build a technology company, is Google going to find you and acquire you? Probably not. If you're in Buenos Aires, if you're in Gibraltar, if you're in Lithuania, if you are in Bangladesh, the problem is the same. And venture capital is kind of based on this idea that they will invest in 50 or 100 companies. And out of that, maybe 2 or 3 will have huge outsized exits. And then money rains down on all of the investors, the people who manage the fund, and moving forward. I believe it's time to actually hard fork venture capital. I think that this problem is large enough. I actually think that the liquidity problem is one of the most pressing problems, economic problems of our day. Hard fork in nerd terms is when you have a software project that a bunch of people are contributing to, nerds tend to be fairly idealistic. Anyone ever heard of someone argue over Mac versus PC? These are religious holy wars. This is a techno-religion, and people disagree. And there are splits. There are schisms in this techno-religion, and a hard fork is when two groups of nerds who have been working on one project say, you know what, we differ ideologically, and we actually need to separate ways. I am very interested in hard forking venture capital. Why? I believe that the lack of liquidity in venture capital is one of our huge and largest problems. I believe that venture capital funds need to be liquid. What does that mean? An investor into a venture capital fund should be able to buy, sell, and trade their stock at any given point in time. And that fundamentally changes the economics and how you actually think of venture capital as a fund manager. The standard deal in Silicon Valley, if I'm a venture capitalist, is I invest in 100 companies, and I hope to God that one of those turns into a unicorn. Sometimes I end up with a portfolio full of chihuahuas, and you try to tell your investors, no, really, they actually look great. No, honestly. And it's because of this lack of liquidity. If you actually have a liquid fund, and if you come up with a way to value your portfolio, and if you can accurately measure the growth and value of your portfolio, all of a sudden, and you report that and you audit that as if you were a publicly traded fund, all of a sudden, your job as a fund manager is to not guess which companies are going to become unicorns or worth $1 billion. Your job as a fund manager is, how do I select companies that are going to grow 50 or 100% a year for the next few years? Which is a phenomenally much easier problem. I have a portfolio full of these companies. Is Google going to buy them? Probably not, because 2/3 of my portfolio comes from overseas. We help them establish the Silicon Valley offices. But if their engineering team is in Buenos Aires, can they get visas to come and work for Google, come and work for Facebook? I don't know, it's awkward. But the mechanics of a liquid venture fund fundamentally completely change the game. A case study for me is Latin America. Remember, I grew up in a mud house, 6 hours of dirt road. It's where I come from. Hablo español. En Latinoamérica, digo, soy de la raza. I just look white. I'm actually kind of caramel on the inside. If you actually look at Latin America, and if you think about it as one market, it's about 10% of the world's economy speaks Spanish. It only receives, and in aggregate, it's about an $8 trillion economy. If you add Brazil into the mix, it actually goes up to about a $12 trillion economy. It's a little bit shy of the Chinese market, but it's roughly comparable. The challenge is because there is no liquidity, it receives a maximum of $500 million a year in angel investment, venture investment, and private equity combined. This is why these countries don't get rich. This is why the United States and Silicon Valley gets richer. It's this fundamental lack of liquidity. If I have a technology, we have an office in Guadalajara, Mexico. Guadalajara has more engineers than all of Ireland. Anyone ever think of engineering in Guadalajara? You will now. 2 years ago, our team there actually won a Guinness World Record for the largest hackathon for social good. We actually had 600 teams competing in one event. It's amazing what's actually happening in the grassroots in Latin America. I'm frankly much more excited about what's happening down there than what's happening in Silicon Valley, but that's another story. But if I build a technology company in Guadalajara, where are my exit options? The largest companies in Mexico are Pemex, a petroleum company, Cemex, a cement company, Pan Bimbo, which is one of the largest bread producers in the world. I don't think Pan Bimbo is actually going to be buying too many technology companies. And so this fundamental lack of liquidity prevents investment into this market, which is why you see this. If we could essentially build a $100 million fund and invest it into Latin America, we would increase total direct foreign investment into this continent by 5 to 10% per year. One fund. That's absurd. This fund would actually move entire economies. Why am I so passionate about this? You see, when you grow up at the end of 6 hours of dirt road in a rural country and your parents are missionaries, you end up spending a lot of time just around poverty. I grew up playing soccer with kids who didn't have shoes. And that just is always stuck with me. I'm 44 years old. I'm still talking about it. Now, the challenge is my initial dream was I was going to come to Silicon Valley. I was going to learn how to build a technology company. I was going to sell it to the Google for $10 million. I'd put that money in the bank, and then I would retire, and I'd figure out how to get shoes on little kids in Central America. Kind of do economic development stuff. I think the opportunity that we actually have right now, and I think that the opportunity that distributed capitalization, that distributed liquidity is actually giving us, is I think that we can actually fundamentally make a serious impact in poverty. Why is that, Jonathan? How do you get shoes on a kid? Mom and dad need better jobs. How do you get better jobs? You need better companies. How do you get better companies? You end up providing more capital and more support to those companies. For every technology job that you actually create in an area, there are 5 other well-paying service jobs. If you actually do a $100 million fund into Latin America, that could easily mean 100,000 technology jobs, which multiplied times 5 is 500,000 good-paying jobs. You move the entire economy, and you could conceivably put shoes on millions of children. And in my mind, that's actually what keeps me going 100 hours a week. That's my passion. Yes, making money. Yes, making a difference. Yes, changing the world. But in my mind, this is what it's about, and this is what keeps me going. So this is Hack VC. It's what actually we're doing. We are hard forking the venture capital industry, and we do have a pre-sale going on right now. It's kind of unofficial. If you're interested in talking to us about it, you can either email us or you can actually talk with us at the counter there. But thank you guys very, very much.